Many thanks to my supporters on Patreon. If you'd like to join them, check the link in the description. But now, enjoy the video. There are many things that come to mind when we think about the classic Gran Turismo games. From class-leading visuals, to the in-depth handling model, and even the banger soundtracks, all of them help the series stay a cut above the competition. But whilst each of these areas have been covered pretty extensively, there is one aspect that I feel deserves more attention. Each game has a visual identity that's conveyed not just through the on-track side, but also the UI and menu design. There's a lot to appreciate here, but for me, the element that always jumps to mind is the unique art that you'll find for each race event. These are edited images made using a mixture of real pictures, in-game screenshots, and pre-rendered graphics. However, to describe them in such a cold way, I feel doesn't really do them justice. Because yes, they may just be some PNGs, but I truly believe that they add a decent amount to the experience of playing these games. Whilst they're very easy to ignore, if you actually give them some attention, you'll soon realise that they can be a lot more interesting than they might seem at first glance. So with that in mind, join me today as we cover the history of event thumbnails in Gran Turismo. We'll be looking at not just how they appear in the various games and the differences between them, but also what each of them represents, their fascinating details and trivia, and even hilarious and sometimes bizarre oversights. Kicking things off with the original Gran Turismo, we can find that event thumbnails have been part of the series from the very beginning. In this game, they take the form of in-game screenshots showing the types of cars you can expect to come up against. Along with that, they also include the event name, as well as a short description explaining what the event is all about. In terms of inspiration, I think they're pretty clearly influenced by posters created to advertise real-life racing events at the time, particularly those seen in Japan. Their goal is to represent the events and make them look appealing. That said, the ones in-game are still lacking a bit compared to their real-world counterparts. Really, the only visual flair is the partially faded checkered flag motif that's present on every one, as well as the screenshots themselves being given a filter that almost makes them look like they were drawn in MS Paint. All in all, they're fairly basic, but at this point still a nice detail that adds to the charm of the game. To be honest, there isn't a whole lot more to say about them, but still a few notable things. The image for the FF challenge is one of my personal favourites, as it shows the Mitsubishi FTO taking the ideal line through Trial Mountain's final chicane. The irony of this is that Trial Mountain isn't actually used in the event. The image seen on the Gran Turismo Cup, meanwhile, is actually a pretty well-known screenshot that was previously used as the cover art for the test drive demo of the game. It's also not the only example of a screenshot like this being reused, as the same is true for the Grand Valley 300km endurance race. What you'll notice in the original image is that it doesn't actually show Grand Valley Speedway, but rather Special Stage Route 5 in reverse. To be fair, the image has been edited in a way so that it isn't obvious to tell, but contradicting details like these will become a bit of a theme. Another screenshot that shows all of the same cars at the same track but from a different angle is used for the Gran Turismo World Cup, aka the final event in the game. If it feels like you've seen this somewhere else, it's probably because it's also used as the background image on the main menu. Also, fun fact, the image used for both Special Stage Route 11 endurance races is the only one that doesn't feature any cars. And one final thing, the thumbnail for the bonus GT Hi-Fi mode uses a different font, as well as a unique blue filter. Now then, let's move on to the follow-up, Gran Turismo 2. GT2 doesn't actually contain any event thumbnails, at least not in the traditional style. As for why, that's hard to say. It could have just been a simple design choice, or maybe another symptom of the game's famously rushed development. Either way, they're not here. GT2 did expand on the event logos that also appeared in GT1, these small symbols that you can see next to the event name. Most of them depict a basic outline of the type of car the event is for, but there are some unique ones. For example, the Sunday Cup is represented by this red sun symbol, and the Tune Turbo Car Cup has a turbo. Makes sense. The dirt events have logos for each track, and so do the endurance races, most of which also include the length of the race. The Endurers are also notable as their entry screens include pre-rendered screenshots of each track. Kinda cool, but still not exactly an actual event thumbnail. Really, I think the event that comes closest is the GT World Championship. Its entry page has an edited screenshot showing some of the cars you can expect to face. It's definitely a lot closer to what we saw in GT1, but I still consider it as a background image rather than a proper thumbnail. Alrighty then, now we move on to Gran Turismo 3. This is where things really start to get interesting. The presentation of GT3 was a massive upgrade on the PS1 games. Not only did it look much better in terms of fidelity, the design of the menus and other graphical elements also took a big step up. Part of this was thanks to the return of event thumbnails, looking significantly better than they did in GT1. Whereas they all had pretty much the same basic design in that game, here they look totally distinct from one another. GT3 is the first game in the series to incorporate real-life images into these thumbnails. Along with that, they also took the idea of event logos and expanded on them, as they now feature within the thumbnails themselves. To me, it's clear that a lot of work was put into making them feel not only unique, but also emblematic of the race events they're attached to. I feel like the theming is just spot on for so many of them, considering the types of cars they feature or the nature of the event itself. I could gush about them all day, but let's talk details. Not only are these thumbnails very visually striking, they're also filled with many interesting things, intentional or otherwise. Take the Sunday Cup, the token starter event. Its thumbnail features a real image of the DC Sports Integra that competed in the SCCA World Challenge. This car does not appear in GT3, but it was referenced as a racing modification for the standard Integra in GT2. It can also be seen in behind-the-scenes footage of GT2 being driven at Sonoma Raceway, presumably by someone on the Gran Turismo team. Sticking with real-life images, the Toyota GT1 is fairly prevalent, in particular pictures of it at Le Mans in 1998, which feature on 3 different events. However, the Toyota Corolla WRC manages to top that by appearing on the thumbnails of 4 of the rally events. Meanwhile, on the European Championship, we can see the Lister Storm V12, a race car which does also feature in GT3, albeit it's a bit faster than the competition you'll face in this event. But there's something here that's even more interesting. In the foreground, there's a GT-themed racing helmet which belongs to Kazunori Yamauchi, the creator of Gran Turismo. I think the implication of this is quite cool. Instead of just being a stock racing image, we now know that this picture was actually taken by the GT team on location. By the way, a version of this helmet can be seen in GT4 when driving some of the open-top cars, as well as in the PS3 games as an equipable item. Speaking of images taken on location, I believe another can be seen in the thumbnail for the Clubman Cup. It shows a man getting out of a car, but if you look closely at the helmet he's wearing, you can just about make out the text D-Rights. Those of you who watched my retrospective on license tests will remember that D-Rights was the name of the driving school which Kaz attended prior to making the original Gran Turismo. Cars with their branding also appeared in a couple of license tests in GT2. Some event thumbnails show cars that are not relevant to it, or in some cases even directly contradict it. For instance, the All Japan GT Championship includes a cropped and edited version of an image that you might remember from the language select screen in the PAL version of GT2. Needless to say, none of the cars shown in it are JGTC racers. Speaking of which, the Stars and Stripes event for American cars shows the rear of the Raybrigg-sponsored Honda NSX GT500, a Japanese car that isn't even allowed in said events. The same car is also seen in the image for the Dream Car Championship, an event intended for GT original race cars. However, I suppose there's nothing stopping you from using it here yourself. A handful of pre-release screenshots were reused to make some of these thumbnails, and they too are prone to stuff like this. For example, the Trial Mountain 2 Hours Endurance Race shows GT500 cars, but the actual event is for unmodified road cars. The same is true for the Seattle 100 Miles, GT500s on the thumbnail, but US road cars in the race. Interesting note, thanks to certain wallpaper websites, this screenshot is commonly misattributed to Gran Turismo 4, a mistake most likely down to the fact that the cars and track reappear in that game pretty much unchanged. Of course, there are events which don't depict any cars or anything car-related on their thumbnails, such as Like the Wind. But even images like these can contain some cool details. For example, the Polyphony Digital Cup shows what looks like a big X, but it's actually a zoom-in on Polyphony's logo. I think this is something that you could very easily gloss over. The 80 Sports Car Cup has a very strong similarity to the Japanese flag, and I don't think that was by accident. The only 1980s cars in GT3 are all from Japan, so I think this was a subtle way to reference that. Something I should probably address is regional differences. Many of these thumbnails appear slightly different depending on which version of the game you play. A lot of the time this mostly just relates to Japanese text being translated, but there are some other changes too. Italian Avant-Garde is one such example, where the removal of the Diablo GT500 in international versions resulted in the car being subbed out for the Zonda C12 on this thumbnail. the art for the European Championship also has quite a different look in Japan, where you'll notice that European is spelled wrong. This was corrected in later releases, but these versions also strangely carry over a couple of Japanese characters. This is also true in the Roadster Endurance, where the character for Taikyu, meaning endurance, is left as is. The PAL release includes a curious change where, no matter the language, the image for the Elise trophy states that it's 10 races instead of 5. In the game, it is still 5 races, so why this error only exists in PAL, which released after Japan and North America, is beyond me. But speaking of the Elise trophy, that leads me to another point. You might have noticed that many of these event banners include quite clunky English. For example, skillfully drive today's fairy of the legendary Colin Chapman. The phrasing is very strange. Well, what's important to consider is that this text already existed in the original Japanese version, meaning that it was never localized for English-speaking audiences. To be fair, even some of the text that has been translated sounds kinda weird, like a car born to run fast, or drive the winds of Europe. They sort of make sense, but nobody would actually say stuff like this. However, easily my favourite case of broken English can be found in the 4-wheel drive challenge. If you've never read the text on the sides before, let me just say that you're in for a treat. Why don't you choose 4-wheel drive? Though it is the composition which became stable most and stands big outputs. Now we declare 4-wheel drive is a supreme. If you approve of this declaration, to participate in this challenge. Yo, what the f? So this was very clearly not written or even double-checked by a native English speaker. But how did this happen? I think the reason relates to it effectively just being filler text that was put there to look nice. Most of the Japanese audience wouldn't have been able to read it, and given that it was already in English, they seemingly felt no need to rewrite it for international releases, thus creating this hilarious situation. It's worth mentioning that in the files of GT3, there exist early versions for some of these event banners. Now, a lot of the text and images used here are clearly placeholders, and this is also true for the 4-wheel drive challenge. Here the text on the side is about titanium, but the way it's phrased implies that the text seen in the final release used it as a template. The line, "Why titanium?" is what gives it away. Interestingly, the American Championship also included some jank English, which goes, "Anyway, the charm of the car is the power. Here is the championship for the people believed like that. Enter now." What's different in this case is that this text was removed from the international versions, most likely because someone on the localization team actually noticed it. But on the topic of filler text, there are a couple more bizarre examples I'd like to highlight. On both versions of the Super Special Stage Route 5 event, there's a really small block of text. But if you focus on it, what you'll realise is that it's from a different racing game entirely, Formula 1 99 on the PS1. The text in question is actually the copyright and licensing disclaimer taken directly from the back of the box. Unintentionally referencing a rival racing game is pretty funny, but I've saved the most unbelievable example for last. The thumbnail for the British GT Car Cup is an interesting case. It's clearly designed to look like a newspaper article, and because of that features a whole load of filler text. Whilst most of it isn't really legible, some of it is. In the top right, you can read "Flurry up and wait," and in the bottom right, "Cowan defends his dealings on state contracts." Interestingly, the original Japanese version has some more text that was cut. Trim and handsome and a bit of an athlete, and also, "Finally, who'll be the winner?" That second part looks like it related to the event, but it was still removed for whatever reason. Regardless, there's some more filler text that's readable in all versions. These state, "Michael M. McDermott's parents, Richard and Rosemary Martinez, in Marsh yesterday," and then at the bottom of the page, "Edgewater Technology employees memorialize." I always felt like these lines were very oddly specific, so I decided to do some research. And what I discovered was a man by the name of Michael Morgan McDermott, who in December 2000 shot and killed 7 people. But how can I be sure that he's the person who's being referred to here? Well, do you know where this shooting took place? Edgewater Technology in Massachusetts. And in the Wikipedia article covering it, we can clearly see the name of his parents, Richard and Rosemary Martinez. I think you can see what I'm getting at. Beyond any doubt, this event thumbnail references the aftermath of a mass shooting that took place just a few months before the game came out. Now for the record, I don't believe that this was at all intentional. As I've already shown, Polyphony's grasp of the English language was not amazing, so I think the inclusion of this text was just incidental. For what it's worth, I've tried to find the original source of where they got it from, but to no avail. So if you have any idea, please let me know, because understanding how this kind of stuff happens really fascinates me. Either way, the end result is that the name of a mass murderer has now been forever immortalized in a Gran Turismo game. That's kinda disturbing to think about. On a lighter note, let's talk about Gran Turismo 4. For the most part, the event thumbnails in this game are just a continuation of what was established in GT3. In fact, a lot of them are carried over from that game, with the only changes being in how they're cropped differently, and in some cases slightly simplified. It also has to be said that there are noticeably fewer unique event banners in this game compared to GT3, down from 58 to just 24. The reason why is because they only apply to events found in the beginner, professional, and extreme halls. Regional events just have a flag, endurance races use a simple background image of the track, one-make events have a screenshot of the cars racing, and the special conditions ones have these custom rally plates, which are admittedly pretty cool. There are still a couple of things worth mentioning about these other ones though. The image for the MG Festival shows a Mark I Golf GTI, possibly an alternate version of the thumbnail for the GTI Cup. Also, the Corvette Festival has a Chevelle SS on its screenshot. Still a Chevrolet, so that's something I guess. One very odd detail is that whilst it may look like the EU flag at first glance, the European events actually use a fictional design that appears very similar. Instead of stars, it has these boomerang-style swoops, and only 10 of them instead of 12. The real EU flag was previously seen at certain tracks in GT3, so I have no idea why they didn't use it in GT4. Of the GT3 style event banners, with so many of them being copied from that game, a lot of their quirks are carried over too, such as the amazing filler text on the 4-wheel drive challenge. However, this reuse does create a few anomalies. In GT4, the classic shaped Mini Cooper only appears in the original Japanese version, most likely due to licensing complications. However, it can still be seen in all versions of the game on the thumbnail for the lightweight K-Car Cup, copied as it was from GT3. The same thing also applies to the Formula GT event, which still shows one of the older style F1 cars that didn't return from the previous game. When it comes to completely brand new designs, there's only 7 in total. That said, of those 7, I think they all fit in well with the existing ones, and a couple do continue trends from GT3. For instance, the image for the Tuning Car Grand Prix contains just barely legible filler text ripped straight from Apple's website. It relates to the iPod Photo, which was announced in October 2004, just a couple months before GT4's original release. The art for the Real Circuit Tours event is also notable for featuring an image taken from the 2003 European Touring Car Championship. This game actually includes a car that raced in the ETCC that year, a BMW 320i. But if you try and use it in this event, things won't go too well. Counterintuitively, the races have you up against high-end prototypes and original LM machines, not touring cars. In the thumbnail we also see a few other cars that don't appear in the game, such as the Seat Toledo and Alfa Romeo 156 touring cars. Fun fact, a previous version of the 156 that competed in the European Super Touring Cup was discovered as a cut car in GT3. Now, let's round things off with the Premium Sports Lounge, where the most prominent car shown is a TVR Tuscan. Uniquely, this event thumbnail includes the car's uncensored UK registration plate, W998AFR. From this, we can discover that this was the car that appeared in the brochure for the Tuscan when it launched. In fact, here is the exact image they used to make this thumbnail. After this, it was put to work as a press car, and even appeared in the 2001 film Swordfish starring John Travolta. All of this adds up to it being easily the most recognizable TVR Tuscan ever made. Really, its minor appearance in GT4 is just another feather in its multicolored cap. Shame it's not actually allowed in the event itself. But with that said, on to Gran Turismo 5. Once again, the general style of these event thumbnails tracks with what was established in GT3, but while some of them are again carried over pretty much as they were, that's not true for all of the returning events. Some of them have banners that have been remade entirely, but with others, the changes are far more subtle. Take the FF Challenge, where the EK Civic Type R remains, but now uses its PS3 spec model. However, there is also a trend of event banners which mimic ones from the past games, but with entirely different car models appearing. So, let's have a rundown of those. For the Sunday Cup, each of the 5 small screenshots showing various cars have been updated. The image on the lightweight K-Cup, which previously showed the Mini Cooper, Daihatsu Mirror, and Suzuki Alto, has been swapped for one depicting the Suzuki Cappuccino, Autozam AZ1, Daihatsu Copen, and Honda Beat. For the FR Challenge, the Nissan Silvia S15 has been switched for a 370Z. The Supercar Festival replaces two of the three Ford GTs with the Ferrari Enzo and Lotus Esprit. Tuning Car Grand Prix switches a real image of the Spoon S2000 race car with an in-game shot of the high-end performance G37. GT All-Stars has its art updated by swapping the Subaru Impreza Rally Car 99 and 2000 Autobax NSX with the Mazda 787B and Audi R10 respectively. And finally, the American Championship now uses the Ford Mark IV in place of the Dodge Viper GTSR, but the Corvette C5R still remains. Also, a quick mention to the 80s Sports Car Cup, which returns from GT3, but now named the Japanese 80s Festival. Not only does this confirm my prior theory about its similarities to the Japanese flag, it's also been updated to include a few relevant car models. All in all, I like these changes as they update the previous images with higher quality assets, many of which being cars that are new to the series. But at the same time, they still manage to retain the same charm they had from the past games. There are more references found in some of the new events too. For example, the art for the La Festa Cavallino and Lamborghini exclusive events are both clearly inspired by the Italian avant-garde from GT3. Many of the regional events also take inspiration from those in GT4, but instead of just featuring a flag and their name in plain text, they now also incorporate an in-game screenshot as well as a more stylized event logo. This means that for the European events, we also see the return of the fictional EU flag design. European Championship is an outlier though, because its thumbnail is again heavily inspired by the one from GT3, complete with Kaz wearing his GT helmet and Japanese characters for some reason. The Lupo Cup One Make event is a very unique case, as its image is taken from the cover art of Gran Turismo Lupo Cup training version. In case you didn't know, this was a demo version of Gran Turismo Concept that was originally given out to participants of the Lupo GTI Cup Japan back in 2003. This game is notable for having the first official appearance of Tsukuba Circuit in the series, and its version 2 also debuted Fuji Speedway. Until recently, this game was pretty much unknown in the West. One thing you might have noticed with event thumbnails is that they can sometimes represent pre-release builds, such as by featuring earlier car models that are noticeably less detailed than in the final game. In GT5, this manifests in a slightly different way on the image for the NASCAR Series event. Here you can find a version of Tony Stewart's number 14 Chevy Impala, but with an alternate livery that was seen in prior screenshots and trailers, before being changed in the final release. But the interesting details in these event banners extend further than just what we can see in-game. GT5 is notorious for its cut content, and this includes more single-player events, some of which have their own thumbnails. Yet again, the most notable ones for the sake of this video are the scrapped returning events that had updated art made for them. These include the likes of the MR Challenge, Clio Trophy, and aforementioned Italian Avant-Garde, among others. Of them, my highlights include Stars and Stripes, where the Rayburg NSX is replaced by the Camaro SS, an actual American car in the event specifically for American cars. The updated 4-wheel drive challenge sadly didn't make the cut either, though it is still the composition which became stable most and stands big output. And then we have the British GT Car Cup, where the Aston Martin DB7 has been replaced with the DB9. This wasn't the only change though, as they did rewrite the filler text on the left-hand side, thus removing any reference to a certain deadly shooting. It's ironic when you think that this version of the event banner was the one that was never seen in-game. By this point in the series, the event thumbnails had become a minor but still identifying aspect of the Gran Turismo experience. So that just made what happened next all the more disappointing. With Gran Turismo 6, they pretty much gave up on them. Instead of colourful edited collages, every single player event is represented by a simple in-game screenshot. To me, this is a pretty clear downgrade on the previous entries, and frankly, I don't really understand why they did it. As I've discussed in a previous video, GT6 does a lot of things with its single player that I'm not really a fan of. But whether it's the frustrating tutorial, being forced to buy the Honda Fit, or the star-based progression system, you can at least make an argument for why they made those decisions. With each of them, the goal is seemingly to streamline the experience for newer players and thus make the game more approachable, at the cost of it being a less interesting experience, in my opinion. However, I can't conceive of any reason to simplify event thumbnails in the way they did, other than they simply couldn't be bothered to make them anymore. And given the effort they put into making the ones in the previous games, that strikes me as very odd. It's a real shame too, because alongside the usual returning events, there are also plenty of all new ones. Personally, I would have loved to see what they could have come up with for events like Gornagrat League and Rainmasters. As a result, I feel like GT6's single player career lacks personality. There aren't even any event logos like in GT2. Visually, they all just sort of blend together into one homogeneous soup. To be honest, the closest they ever got to the old style thumbnails in this game are the ones they created for the seasonal events, but even that isn't really the same. And with the next entry in the series being the online focused Gran Turismo Sport, we would have to wait a bit longer to see proper event thumbnails return. Fortunately, it wouldn't take that long, as only a couple months after the game released, the GT League mode was added to it. This was a suite of single-player events modelled after the career modes of the past games, and that included their custom event banners. Over the course of this game's run, 46 different events would be added, each with their own unique thumbnail. However, they're not in exactly the same style as how they were in the previous entries. For instance, none of them incorporate real pictures. They're all composed of in-game shots, either taken from replay photo mode or escapes. Also, they are noticeably simplified compared to previous iterations. All of them are made up of said in-game shots, sometimes with a filter, along with some basic graphics and the event logo. I imagine that making them this way is a lot less time intensive, but also makes them feel a bit more generic. Still, this is a big improvement over GT6, and as you can see, many of them still reference the past games with their general composition. All in all, for a side mode added in an update, it's not a bad effort, and the inclusion of Windroad, the arcade menu music from GT2, ties it all together into a decent nostalgia trip. Speaking of a nostalgia trip, this is what many people expected to have when Gran Turismo 7 was revealed. Its career was billed as a return to the golden days of the series, but it ended up being a very different sort of experience. As for the event thumbnails, these two would somewhat miss the mark. They're basically just the unedited screenshots like in GT6, but with the event logo slapped on top. No filters, graphics, or other design elements. Well, other than the few events which have these chili pepper symbols denoting their level of difficulty. And that's really all there is to say about them. When it comes to event banners in Gran Turismo, there is a very obvious golden era that consists of GT3, GT4, and GT5. These are the games in which they put the most effort into making them, and it shows. After this point, they seem to stop really caring, and despite a brief resurgence in GT Sports, have pretty much given up on them entirely. To compare what we see in GT7 to those earlier games isn't even a competition. It's funny, despite being such a relatively minor thing in these games, the common trend we see when it comes to the single-player experience still plays out the same way. The PS1 games laid the groundwork, then the PS2 games came along and really expanded on that potential, before the slow and gradual decline through to current day, where they just don't seem to care anymore. I hate to be so repetitive, but it's the truth. At the same time, I don't want to pretend like event thumbnails matter more than what they actually do. They're a nice flourish for these games to have, but don't fundamentally change them. A bad game would still be bad, even if it does them well, and a great game would still be great, even if it does them badly. But regardless, I'd be lying if I said that they haven't had an impact on me. Looking at these images in the older games takes me back to playing them for the first time as a kid in a way that no other part of them does, and I can't really explain why. Even after returning to these games as an adult with a much more critical lens, the event banners still evoke a degree of nostalgia that's hard for me to look past. In my opinion, they possess a level of charm that no amount of ray tracing will ever be able to surpass. And to be honest, the many errors, inconsistencies, and oddities found in them only add to that feeling. I think it should be obvious by now, more than 25 minutes into this video about them, that I really do believe that these event thumbnails matter more to this series than most people realize. In fact, calling them thumbnails, as I have been doing for this entire video, is an important point. In the same way that the thumbnail for a YouTube video is aimed at drawing you into watching it, the thumbnails for these events should make you want to do them. They're a core part of the appeal, and when thinking about iconic race events from the older games, their event banners will likely be one of the first things that come to mind. As a YouTuber, trying to create attractive thumbnails like these is part of what I do. In fact, making this video has made me realize just how much of my graphic design has been influenced by Gran Turismo, whether directly or even on a subconscious level. As such, I find their absence from the series in current day quite a shame. Regardless, I hope that through this video, I've been able to show that these PNGs hold a lot more stories and secrets than you ever realized.